My daughter-in-law, Jessica, threw her martini in my face and called me selfish. But what I did next made both her and my son Mark faint on my dining room floor. If you're watching this, subscribe and let me know where you're watching from. Let me back up and tell you how I got to that moment. Because honestly, even I couldn't have predicted it would end with two grown adults passed out cold in my house. 3 weeks earlier, I'd been standing in Murphy's corner store, clutching a lottery ticket that had just made me $2 million richer. $2 million. At 67, after 30 years of teaching third grade and living paycheck to paycheck, I was suddenly wealthy. The first thing I did was call Mark, my only child, practically sobbing with joy into the phone. "Mom, that's incredible," he'd said. And I could hear Jessica squealing in the background. "We have to celebrate properly. Let me plan something special for you." The warmth in his voice made my heart flutter. Maybe this windfall would finally bring us closer together. Since Jessica entered the picture 5 years ago, our relationship had grown distant. She had strong opinions about everything, from my outdated furniture to my small-minded lifestyle in our little town of Clearwater. But money changes things, doesn't it? I spent the next 2 weeks in a happy daze, meeting with financial advisors and making sensible plans. I'd always been practical, even with this unexpected fortune. Pay off my mortgage, set aside money for retirement, maybe take that trip to Ireland I'd always dreamed about. The rest would go into savings, earning interest for whatever life might bring. Mark called every other day during those 2 weeks, more attentive than he'd been in years. "How are you feeling, Mom? Are you getting good advice about the money? Jessica thinks you should talk to her financial planner. He's really sharp." I was touched by his concern, though. Something about Jessica's involvement made me slightly uneasy. She worked in marketing for a luxury hotel chain and had expensive tastes that always seemed to outpace their budget. "I've got it handled, sweetheart," I'd assured him. "The bank connected me with someone very reputable. We're being conservative with investments." "Conservative is good," he'd agreed, though I detected a hint of disappointment. "Just remember, you've got family who love you. If you ever want to do something generous, well, we'd never say no to helping out." That should have been my first warning, but I was too happy to read between the lines. The dinner party was scheduled for Saturday night. Mark insisted on handling everything, bringing all the food and decorations to my house. "It's your celebration, Mom. You shouldn't lift a finger." Jessica even offered to do the cooking, which surprised me since she usually considered domestic tasks beneath her. As Saturday approached, I found myself genuinely excited. When was the last time my son had gone to such trouble for me? When was the last time Jessica had shown any interest in spending time together? Maybe I'd been too quick to judge their motives. Maybe this money would be the bridge that reconnected our family. I spent Friday evening cleaning my already spotless house and Saturday morning at the salon, getting my silver hair styled and treating myself to a manicure. If we were celebrating my good fortune, I wanted to look the part. I even bought a new dress, navy blue with tiny flowers, the most expensive thing I'd purchased for myself in years. By 5 o'clock Saturday, I was ready. The table was set with my mother's good china. Candles were lit and I was wearing my new dress with pearl earrings that had belonged to my grandmother. I felt elegant and hopeful and grateful for this second chance at happiness. The doorbell rang at exactly 6, and I opened it to find Mark carrying grocery bags and flowers with Jessica behind him holding what looked like a briefcase. "Happy celebration day, Mom." Mark kissed my cheek and handed me the flowers. Even Jessica smiled and gave me a quick hug, which was more physical affection than she'd shown me in years. "These are beautiful," I said, admiring the roses. "You really didn't need to go to such trouble." "Nothing's too good for our lottery winner," Jessica said. And something in her tone made me glance at her more closely. She was dressed more formally than usual, in a crisp white blouse and dark pants that looked almost businesslike, and that briefcase seemed odd for a family dinner. But Mark was already heading to the kitchen, unpacking containers of what smelled like expensive catered food, and I pushed my concerns aside. This was supposed to be a happy evening. I'd earned the right to simply enjoy being celebrated by the people I loved most. How naive I was to think it would be that simple. The dinner was perfect, almost suspiciously so. Mark had ordered from Chat Lauren, the French restaurant that charged $50 for an entree. Jessica actually complimented my house, something she'd never done before. "You know, Margaret, this place has real charm. Very authentic." Margaret, she'd never called me by my first name before. Always just Mark's mom when she addressed me at all. I should have recognized it as the opening move in whatever game they were playing. Thank you, dear. I've always loved this house. I passed the wine. Mark had brought something with a fancy label that probably cost more than my usual weekly grocery budget. This is all so thoughtful of you both. Well, you deserve it, Mark said, raising his glass. To Mom and to family taking care of family. We clinked glasses. And I felt tears prick my eyes. This was what I'd wanted for so long. Just the three of us sharing a meal like a real family. Jessica actually laughed at my stories about the chaos at the bank when I tried to cash the lottery ticket. Mark listened attentively when I described my plans for the money. Very sensible, he nodded approvingly, though maybe a little too conservative. I mean, with that kind of money you could really help people, make a difference in lives that matter to you. I'm sure I'll find ways to be generous, I agreed, thinking of the church fund and the local food bank where I volunteered. When you have more than you need, sharing is important. Jessica and Mark exchanged a look across the table so quick I almost missed it. But something about that glance made my stomach tighten slightly. There was an urgency to it, a sense of coordination that felt rehearsed. Actually, Mom. Mark set down his fork and suddenly looked serious. That's something we wanted to talk to you about tonight. Family helping family. And there it was. The real reason for this elaborate dinner, for Jessica's unusual friendliness, for Mark's sudden attention over the past 2 weeks. They wanted something. Of course they did. Why had I let myself believe otherwise? What kind of help? I asked, though I dreaded the answer. Jessica reached for that briefcase she'd brought and pulled out a thick folder. Well, it's a bit complicated, but I know you'll understand once we explain everything. She opened the folder and slid a stack of papers across the table toward me. Even upside down I could see numbers, lots of them, and the letterhead of a law firm I didn't recognize. Jessica's been having some financial difficulties, Mark said, his voice taking on the careful tone he used when he was about to ask for something he knew I wouldn't want to give. Nothing serious, just some temporary cash flow issues that got out of hand. I picked up the papers, scanning the first page. It was a statement from something called Premier Credit Solutions addressed to Jessica Walsh Thompson. The amount at the bottom made my hands start trembling. $847,000 in outstanding debt. $800,000? I looked up at Jessica, who was watching me with the intense focus of a cat stalking a mouse. How is that possible? Well, it's complicated, she began. But I cut her off. It's not complicated at all. This says you owe almost $1 million. How does someone our age accumulate that kind of debt? Jessica's friendly mask slipped for just a moment, revealing something cold and calculating underneath. Our age? I'm 38, Margaret. I'm building a life, establishing myself professionally. Sometimes that requires investment. Investment? I flipped through more pages, seeing charges for luxury hotels, expensive restaurants, designer clothing stores, a lease on a BMW that cost more than I'd ever spent on a car. This wasn't investment. It was indulgence. And you want me to pay this? The question came out sharper than I'd intended. Mark reached across the table and covered my hand with his. Mom, you just won $2 million. Jessica made some mistakes, but she's family now. Family helps family. Remember, family helps family. The words I'd raised him to live by, now being used as a weapon against me. I looked at my son, this man I'd sacrificed everything to raise, and wondered when he'd become someone I barely recognized. Mark, this is almost half of what I won before taxes. But you don't really need all that money, Jessica said, her voice honey-sweet again. You're 67. You live simply. Your house is paid off. What are you going to do with $2 million anyway? The audacity of it took my breath away. What was I going to do with my money? Live comfortably for the first time in my life? Travel, have security, maybe leave something for my grandchildren's education if Mark ever had children with this woman. I'm going to live on it, I said quietly. It's my retirement. Come on, Mom. Mark's voice carried an edge of impatience. Be realistic. Social Security plus investment income from even half the winnings would be more than enough for your lifestyle. You could help Jessica get back on her feet and still be set for life. My lifestyle. As if my simple existence was somehow proof that I didn't deserve better, that I should be grateful for scraps while they lived in luxury funded by my good fortune. I set the papers down carefully and looked from my son to his wife, seeing them clearly for perhaps the first time. This whole evening, the expensive dinner, the false warmth, even Mark's increased attention over the past 2 weeks, it had all been leading to this moment. They hadn't been celebrating my good luck. They'd been calculating how to take it away from me. And if I say no, I asked. The silence that followed told me everything I needed to know about what would happen to our relationship if I didn't hand over nearly half my winnings to pay for Jessica's shopping sprees and luxury lifestyle. If you say no. Jessica's laugh was like glass breaking. Well, Margaret, I suppose that would tell us exactly what kind of person you really are. I felt something cold settle in my chest. In all my years of teaching, I dealt with plenty of manipulative children. But this was different. This was my own family trying to guilt me into funding their mistakes. What kind of person would that make me, Jessica? I asked, genuinely curious to hear her answer. The kind who wins the lottery and forgets where she came from, Mark said before Jessica could respond. The kind who gets money and suddenly thinks she's better than the people who've supported her all these years. Supported me? I almost laughed at the absurdity. When had Mark supported me? When had either of them done anything for me that wasn't motivated by their own convenience or needs? Supported me? How exactly? The question slipped out before I could stop it. Mark's face flushed. Are you serious? We invite you to holidays. We call you regularly. We include you in our lives. That's support, Mom. That's family. Include me in their lives. Like I should be grateful for the privilege of attending their dinner parties where Jessica's friends treated me like an amusing relic, or for the occasional phone calls where Mark updated me on his work while barely asking about my life. And in return for that support, Jessica added smoothly, we're asking for your help when we really need it. It's not like we're asking for a handout. This is a loan. I'll pay you back. A loan. I looked down at the papers again, noting the multiple collection agency warnings, the legal notices, the accounts that had already been charged off. Someone who owed nearly $1 million wasn't in a position to pay back anything. How would you pay me back, Jessica? According to these statements, you haven't made a payment on most of these accounts in months. That's temporary, she snapped, her composure cracking. I'm between positions right now, but I have interviews lined up. Good positions. Once I land something, I can set up a payment plan. Between positions. That was news to me. The last I'd heard, she was doing well in her marketing job. I thought you loved your job at the hotel chain, I said. Mark and Jessica exchanged another look. This one lasted longer and I could practically see them debating how much truth to share. There was a reorganization, Mark finally said. Jessica's position was eliminated. It wasn't performance-related. When did this happen? 3 months ago, Jessica admitted reluctantly. 3 months. And they'd been dealing with this massive debt, while she was unemployed for 3 months. But they'd waited until I won the lottery to share this information. The timing was too perfect to be coincidental. So, you've known about these financial problems for months, but you only decided to ask for help after I came into money. That's not how it happened, Mark said quickly. But his tone suggested otherwise. Then how did it happen? Look, Jessica leaned forward, abandoning any pretense of sweetness. The truth is, I made some mistakes. I got in over my head with credit cards and loans. I thought I could manage it, but then I lost my job and everything spiraled. Mark and I have been trying to figure out how to handle it. And then you got lucky with the lottery. Seemed like fate. Fate. My years of financial struggle of stretching every dollar and denying myself small luxuries followed by this incredible stroke of luck. And she called it fate that she should benefit from it. And if I hadn't won the lottery, what would you have done then? Bankruptcy, Jessica said bluntly, which would have destroyed my credit for years and probably cost Mark his security clearance at work. Mark worked for a defense contractor. I knew his job required government clearance, and I also knew that financial problems could jeopardize that clearance. So this wasn't just Jessica's problem. It was threatening Mark's career too. Why didn't you come to me before? I asked. If this has been going on for months, why wait until now? Mark looked genuinely uncomfortable because we knew you didn't have that kind of money before. We didn't want to burden you with problems you couldn't help solve. The honest answer. Finally, they'd hidden this crisis because I was too poor to be useful. But now that I had money, suddenly I was family again. Suddenly my involvement in their lives mattered. I stood up from the table, needing to move, needing to think. The numbers on those papers swam in front of my eyes. $847,000. It might as well have been $8 million for how impossible it seemed. I need a minute to process this, I said. Of course, Mark said quickly. We know it's a lot to take in. But Mom, time is a factor here. Some of these creditors are threatening legal action. We really need an answer soon. Legal action. The threat hung in the air like smoke. They weren't just asking for my help. They were painting me as responsible for whatever consequences might follow if I refused. I walked to the window and looked out at my small backyard where I'd spent countless hours gardening and thinking. Just this morning I'd been excited about the possibility of traveling, of finally seeing some of the world beyond this small town. I'd imagined having enough money to be generous without sacrificing my own security. Now they were asking me to give up nearly half my winnings to pay for Jessica's lifestyle choices, and somehow I was the villain if I hesitated. I turned back to face them, and something in my expression must have warned them that I wasn't going to simply agree because both of their faces tensed. Margaret, Jessica said carefully, you do understand what this means for our relationship, don't you? If you choose your money over your family. There it was, the ultimatum I'd been dreading. Choose your money over your family. As if loving them meant I owed them my financial security. As if saying no to this enormous request meant I didn't care about them. I looked at my son, this man I'd raised to be better than this, and felt my heart break a little. What this means, Jessica, is that I need to decide whether I raised a son who thinks love can be bought or one who understands that family doesn't put price tags on affection. The silence that followed was deafening. Mark's face went white, then Reed. That's not fair, Mom. You're twisting this into something it's not. Am I? I sat back down at the table, feeling steadier now that the real conversation had finally begun. Then explain to me what it is, because from where I'm sitting it looks like conditional love. It's not conditional, Jessica interrupted. But it is reciprocal. Relationships require give and take, Margaret. We've given you years of family connection, and now we're asking you to give something back. Years of family connection. I almost laughed at how she phrased it, like she'd been doing me a favor by tolerating my presence at their occasional gatherings. What exactly have you given me, Jessica? She blinked, clearly not expecting to have to itemize her contributions. Well, we include you in holidays. We invite you to parties. We call you invite me to parties where your friends treat me like a curiosity and you call me when you need something. What have you given me that actually mattered to me? We gave you a relationship with your only son, she said, her voice turning sharp. Mark is busy. He has his own life, but he makes time for you because I encourage it. Do you think he'd call as often if I wasn't reminding him? The words hit like a slap. She was probably right. Mark had become increasingly distant over the years, and I'd assumed it was natural growing apart. But what if it wasn't natural? What if Jessica had been slowly poisoning his feelings toward me while simultaneously taking credit for any contact we maintained? I looked at Mark, searching his face for some sign that he disagreed with his wife's assessment of our relationship. Instead, I saw embarrassment and something that might have been guilt. Is that true, Mark? Do you only call me because Jessica reminds you? It's not that simple, Mom. I'm busy. We both are. Jessica helps me remember to reach out to people. People. He called me people. As if I were just another item on his social obligations checklist. I see. I folded my hands in my lap, struggling to process this revelation. So, the calls, the visits, the inclusion in your lives, it's all been charity. And now you want me to pay you back for that charity. Stop being so dramatic, Jessica snapped. This isn't about charity. It's about family helping family when there's a crisis. You have the money, we have the need. It's simple math. Simple math. As if my lottery winnings were just numbers on a page instead of the first real security I'd ever had in my life. Here's some simple math for you, Jessica. After taxes, I'll have roughly $1.3 million. You want $847,000 of that. That leaves me with less than $500,000, which is still more money than most people see in a lifetime. Mark said. Mom, you could live comfortably on the interest from that amount. Could I? Maybe if I was very careful. If I never got sick, if I never needed long-term care, if nothing unexpected ever happened. But comfortable and secure weren't the same thing. And I'd lived too many years without security to give it up lightly. You want me to risk my financial stability for your wife's shopping habits? Shopping habits? Jessica's voice rose dangerously. You think this is about shopping? I was building a business. Margaret, I was investing in my future, in our future. Not everyone can be content with your small little life. My small little life. The contempt in her voice was unmistakable. This was what she really thought of me, of the life I'd built through hard work and careful choices. My small little life included raising a son who I hoped would be better than this, I said quietly. Better than what? Mark's patience was clearly running out. Better than asking for help when we need it. Better than expecting family to act like family. Better than threatening emotional blackmail to get money, I replied. Emotional blackmail. Jessica stood up abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. That's what you think this is? We come to you in crisis. We humble ourselves by asking for help, and you accuse us of manipulation. Aren't you manipulating me? You've made it clear that our relationship depends on my answer to this request. How is that not manipulation? Because Mark said, his voice taking on the cold tone I remembered from his teenage years when he didn't get his way. Family is supposed to be there for each other. If you can't be there for us when we really need you, then what kind of family are we? What kind of family indeed? The kind where love came with price tags, apparently. The kind where winning the lottery made you responsible for everyone else's mistakes. I looked around my dining room at the good china and lit candles and expensive catered food they'd brought to soften me up. This whole evening had been theater. A carefully orchestrated performance designed to make me feel valued and loved before they presented the bill. You know what, Mark? You're right. We should talk about what kind of family we are. I stood up and went to the kitchen, returning with my checkbook. Both Mark and Jessica perked up, hope flooding their faces. They thought I was giving in. Instead, I opened the checkbook and very deliberately wrote a check for $1,000. This is what I can afford to give you, I said, tearing it out and placing it on the table. It's a gift, not a loan. Use it however you think best. Jessica stared at the check like it was an insult. $1,000, Margaret. My monthly minimums are more than that. Then you have bigger problems than I can solve. You could solve them, Mark said, his voice tight with frustration. You're choosing not to. I'm choosing to protect my own future instead of funding your wife's past mistakes. Yes. That's when Jessica picked up her martini glass and threw the contents in my face. The cold liquid hit my eyes and dripped down my new dress. Vodka stinging and olive brine making me blink rapidly. You selfish, ungrateful old woman, she hissed. You'd rather hoard your money than help your own family. I stood there dripping olive garnish in my hair and felt something snap inside me. All those years of biting my tongue, of accepting their casual disrespect, of grateful for any crumbs of attention they threw my way. All of it crystallized into perfect cold clarity. You want to see selfish, Jessica? Let me show you selfish. I wiped the martini from my face with my napkin, never breaking eye contact with Jessica. The alcohol smell was strong, but not as strong as the rage building in my chest. 30 years of teaching had given me a lot of practice dealing with entitled behavior. But this was beyond anything I'd encountered in a classroom. Sit down, I said, my voice deadly calm. Something in my tone must have penetrated their shock because both Mark and Jessica actually obeyed, sinking back into their chairs like scolded children. You think I'm selfish for not wanting to give you almost $1 million to pay for your mistakes. Let me tell you what I think is selfish. I picked up the stack of credit card statements and began reading. Nordstrom $47,000. Louis Vuitton $23,000. Four Seasons Resort $8,000. BMW lease $1,200 a month. Should I continue? Jessica's face was flushed, but she lifted her chin defiantly. Those were necessary expenses. Necessary. I laughed. A sound that held no humor. Jessica, I lived on less than $30,000 a year for the last decade. What exactly made a $23,000 purse necessary? You wouldn't understand, she said. My job required a certain image. In the hospitality industry, appearance matters. Your job that you lost 3 months ago, the one that clearly didn't pay enough to support this lifestyle. I sat down the papers and looked directly at Mark and you. You watched your wife accumulate almost $1 million in debt and said nothing. Mark's Adam's apple bobbed as he swallowed hard. I tried to talk to her about it, but Jessica said she had it under control. Under control? I picked up another statement. She was paying minimums with cash advances from other credit cards. That's not control. That's desperation. Everyone manages debt differently, Jessica said defensively. No, Jessica, what you did isn't managing debt. It's creating a financial disaster. And now you want me to pay for it because I happen to win the lottery. I walked to my kitchen and returned with a bottle of wine. Pouring myself a large glass, my hands were steadier than they'd been all evening. Sometimes clarity brings its own kind of calm. Here's what I find most interesting about this whole situation, I continued, settling back into my chair. 3 months ago, when you lost your job and this debt became unmanageable, did you call me? Did you ask for advice or support? Or even just someone to talk to about your problems? Neither of them answered. No, you didn't. You only called me after I won money. Which tells me that until I became useful, I wasn't really family at all. I was just someone you tolerated. That's not true, Mark protested. But his voice lacked conviction. Isn't it? When was the last time you called me just to talk, Mark? Not because you needed something. Not because Jessica reminded you, but because you actually wanted to hear my voice. The silence stretched between us like a chasm. When was the last time either of you asked about my life, my health, my plans, my happiness? I took a sip of wine, tasting the expensive vintage Mark had brought to soften me up. You know what? You asked me tonight. You asked what I was going to do with $2 million, like it was incomprehensible that I might have dreams of my own. Jessica shifted uncomfortably. We didn't mean it like that. How did you mean it? Because from where I'm sitting, it sounded like you couldn't imagine why someone like me would need that much money. Like my life is so small and insignificant that a few $100,000 should be more than enough. Mom, you're taking this the wrong way, Mark said. Am I? Then explain the right way to take it. Explain how your wife throwing a drink in my face was somehow justified. Explain how demanding I pay her debts is an act of love. Mark looked at Jessica, clearly hoping she'd feel this question. But Jessica was staring at her hands, apparently having realized that her dramatic gesture might have gone too far. We're family, Mark said finally. Family helps each other. You keep saying that, but I don't think you understand what it means. I leaned forward, studying my son's face. Family helps each other, but it doesn't bankrupt each other. Family supports each other, but it doesn't manipulate each other. And family definitely doesn't assault each other when they don't get their way. It was just a drink, Jessica muttered. It was assault, Jessica. In front of witnesses in my own home because I wouldn't give you money. What would you call it? The room fell silent again. I could hear the grandfather clock in the hallway ticking, marking seconds in what felt like the longest night of my life. Here's what's going to happen, I said, standing up and smoothing down my damp dress. You're going to leave my house. You're going to figure out your financial problems without my money. And you're going to think very carefully about whether you want to have a relationship with me based on who I am rather than what I can give you. And if we don't, Jessica asked, her voice challenging. I smiled then, and it must have been a terrifying expression because both of them actually leaned back in their chairs. Then you'll discover what selfish really looks like. I walked to the front hall and opened my door, holding it wide. Good night. Thank you for the lovely dinner and the educational evening. Mark stood up slowly. Mom, I think we should talk about this more. Maybe we can find a compromise. There's nothing to compromise about, Mark. Either you love me for who I am or you don't. Either I'm family regardless of my bank balance or I'm not. You can't have it both ways. Jessica gathered up her papers, stuffing them back into the briefcase with sharp, angry movements. You'll regret this, Margaret, when you're sitting alone in this house with all that money and no family to share it with. You'll regret this. I agreed pleasantly. But I'll regret it in comfort, without having to wonder if the people around me love me or my bank account. They walked past me and out into the night without another word. I watched Mark's car pull out of my driveway, noting that he didn't look back at the house. Didn't seem to have any second thoughts about how this evening had ended. When their taillights disappeared around the corner, I closed the door and leaned against it, suddenly exhausted. My dress was still damp with martini. My hair still smelled like olives, and my heart was broken in ways I was only beginning to understand. But I was also free. Free from the desperate need to earn their approval. Free from the constant anxiety about saying or doing the wrong thing. Free from pretending their crumbs of affection were enough to sustain me. I walked back to the dining room and looked at the scene of destruction. expensive food growing cold, wine glasses half full, my grandmother's china waiting to be cleaned, and in the middle of it all, the $1,000 check they'd left behind like it was contaminated. Tomorrow I would start figuring out what my new life looked like. Tonight, I was going to finish that bottle of wine and plan my revenge because they were about to learn that this selfish old woman had a few surprises left in her. I woke up Sunday morning with a mild headache and absolute clarity about what I needed to do. The events of the previous evening felt like a bad dream, except for the dress hanging in my bathroom that still reeked of vodka and the olive that had somehow ended up under my dining room table. My phone had been buzzing since 7 o'clock a.m. 17 missed calls from Mark, 12 from Jessica, and a string of increasingly frantic text messages. Mom, I think we all said things we didn't mean last night. Please call me back. We need to talk. Jessica feels terrible about what happened. This is ridiculous. We're family. Pick up your phone. I deleted them all without responding. I'd spent enough years responding to their summons like a trained dog. That version of Margaret was officially retired. Instead, I made myself breakfast, read the newspaper cover to cover, and then called my financial advisor. Margaret. Harold Brennan's voice was warm with genuine affection. How are you feeling about everything? Still can't quite believe it's real? Harold had been handling my modest investments for 15 years. He was honest, conservative, and had never once suggested I take risks I couldn't afford. More importantly, he'd never made me feel foolish for asking questions or wanting to understand every detail of my financial situation. I'm feeling very clear about my priorities, actually. That's why I'm calling. I need to make some changes to my plans. Of course. What did you have in mind? I want to move half of my winnings into an irrevocable trust. Something that protects the money from any future claims or demands. There was a pause. Margaret, that's a significant step. Irrevocable means you can't change your mind later, even if circumstances change. Is there something specific you're concerned about? I thought about how to explain without sounding paranoid or vindictive. Let's just say I've learned that sudden wealth can change how people see you. I want to make sure I'm protected. I understand completely. It's actually quite wise. Many lottery winners find themselves dealing with unexpected financial pressures from family and friends. Unexpected financial pressures. What a polite way to describe what had happened in my dining room the night before. Can we meet tomorrow to discuss the details? Absolutely. How about 10 a.m.? And Margaret, you're making a smart choice. This kind of protection gives you freedom to enjoy your winnings without constantly worrying about other people's opinions of how you should spend them. After hanging up with Harold, I called my sister Caroline in Phoenix. Caroline was 5 years older, brutally honest, and had never liked Jessica from the moment Mark introduced her. Margaret, how's life as a millionaire treating you? Educationally, I said dryly and told her everything that had happened. Caroline's silence after I finished the story was more eloquent than any words could have been. $800,000, she finally said. That woman spent $800,000 on shopping. Apparently it was necessary for her image. Her image as what? A cocaine dealer? Margaret, no legitimate job requires that kind of wardrobe investment. I actually laughed for the first time since the previous evening. That's what I thought. But according to Mark, I wouldn't understand because my life is too small. Your life isn't small. It's sensible. There's a difference, though. I wouldn't expect a woman who thinks a $23,000 purse is a business expense to understand it. My phone buzzed with another call from Mark. I sent it to voicemail. They're still calling. I told Caroline. Of course they are. You just became the answer to all their problems, and then you had the audacity to say no. They're probably Googling elder abuse right now, trying to figure out if they can have you declared incompetent. The thought sent a chill through me. Could they do that? Not if you're working with a good lawyer and taking sensible steps to protect yourself, which reminds me, you need to document everything that happened last night. Write it all down while it's fresh in case you need it later. I spent the next hour writing a detailed account of the dinner, the demands, Jessica's assault, and my response. As I wrote, I felt my anger crystallizing into something more useful. Determination. My phone rang again. This time it was a number I didn't recognize. Mrs. Thompson, this is Rebecca Walsh, Jessica's mother. I think we need to talk. Interesting. They'd called in reinforcements. Hello, Rebecca. I wasn't expecting to hear from you. Jessica told me about your conversation last night. She's very upset. I imagine she is. Being told no can be difficult when you're not used to hearing it. Mrs. Thompson, I think there's been a misunderstanding. Jessica isn't asking for charity. She's asking for family support during a difficult time. Family support, the same phrase Jessica and Mark had used, like they'd all coordinated their talking points. Rebecca, your daughter threw a drink in my face because I wouldn't give her almost $1 million. What part of that suggests family support to you? There was a pause. She told me you were being deliberately cruel, taunting her about her spending, taunting her. I'd read her credit card statements back to her, stating facts about her choices. If facts felt like taunting, that said more about her guilt than my intentions. I read her credit card bills, Rebecca. The same bills she presented to me as justification for why I should pay her debts. If hearing her own spending choices read aloud felt cruel, perhaps she should examine why. Look, Margaret, I know Jessica can be intense sometimes, but she's my daughter and she's in real trouble. This debt could destroy her life. She created this debt, Rebecca, over several years through deliberate choices. I didn't create this problem and I'm not responsible for solving it. But you have the money now. It would be easy for you to help. Easy for me. As if my feelings, if my security, my future were irrelevant compared to Jessica's convenience. What would be easy, Rebecca, is for Jessica to declare bankruptcy. It exists specifically for situations like this, but that would require her to face consequences for her choices. And apparently the family consensus is that I should face those consequences instead. Bankruptcy would ruin her credit, and demanding I pay her debts is attempting to ruin my financial security. Why is her credit more important than my future? Another pause. Because you're old, Margaret. You don't need money the way a young person does. There it was. The truth underlying all their arguments. Because I was old, my needs didn't matter. Because I was old, I should be grateful for whatever scraps of affection they threw my way. Because I was old, my purpose was to serve their convenience and then disappear. You know what, Rebecca? You're absolutely right. I am old. Old enough to recognize manipulation when I see it. Old enough to know the difference between love and exploitation. And old enough to protect myself from people who think my age makes me expendable. I hung up before she could respond, then immediately called Harold back. Harold, I need to move faster on that trust. How quickly can we get it set up? If it's urgent, I can have the paperwork ready by Wednesday. Is everything all right? Everything is about to be perfect. And Harold, I want to make one more change. I want to set up a foundation as well. Something for financial literacy education. I think there are a lot of people who could benefit from learning about the consequences of irresponsible spending. When I hung up, I felt lighter than I had in years. Let them call. Let them threaten. Let them try to manipulate me through flying monkeys like Jessica's mother. By Wednesday, half my money would be protected in an irrevocable trust, and I'd be documenting their behavior for potential legal action. They wanted to see selfish. They were about to get a masterclass. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. This isn't over. You'll regret treating family this way, Jay. I screenshotted the message and added it to my growing file of evidence, then blocked the number. Actually, Jessica was right about one thing. This wasn't over. It was just beginning. Wednesday morning, I sat in Harold's office signing papers that would change everything. The irrevocable trust was now protecting $650,000 of my winnings, completely out of reach from any future claims or lawsuits. The foundation paperwork was filed, and I'd named it the Responsible Financial Choices Foundation. Even I had to admire my own pettiness. You look satisfied, Harold observed as I signed the final document. I feel prepared, I corrected. There's a difference. My phone had been mercifully quiet for 2 days. Either they'd given up or they were regrouping. Given what I knew about Jessica's personality, I suspected the latter. When I got home, there was a police cruiser in my driveway. Officer Martinez was young, probably early 30s, with kind eyes and the patient demeanor of someone who dealt with family disputes before. He was talking to Mark on my front porch. Mrs. Thompson. He approached as I got out of my car. I'm responding to a wellness check request. Your son was concerned because you haven't been answering your phone. I'm perfectly well, Officer Martinez. Just choosing not to answer calls from people who assault me in my own home. Mark's face flushed. Mom, don't be dramatic. Jessica barely touched you. She threw a drink in my face because I wouldn't give her money. What would you call that? Officer Martinez looked between us with growing understanding. Sir, did your wife throw something at your mother? It was just a martini. She was upset. Being upset doesn't justify assault, the officer said mildly. Ma'am, do you want to file charges? I considered it. The satisfaction would be immense, but it would also escalate things beyond what I was prepared for right now. Not at this time, but I want it documented that they came to my home demanding money. And when I refused, Jessica Walsh Thompson threw her drink at me. My son witnessed it. Officer Martinez made notes in his report. Sir, I'd recommend giving your mother some space. Wellness checks are for people who might be in danger, not for people who aren't answering their phones because they don't want to talk to you. After the officer left, Mark lingered on my porch like a lost child. Mom, this is getting out of hand. Can't we just talk? We did talk, Mark. You told me exactly what you think of me and what you expect from me. The conversation is over. I never said I didn't love you. You said I was choosing money over family. You said I was being dramatic and unfair. You stood by while your wife assaulted me. Those aren't the actions of someone who loves me, Mark. Those are the actions of someone who wants something from me. I walked past him to my door, noting how he made no move to stop me or continue the conversation. Even now, facing the consequences of his choices, he wasn't fighting for our relationship. He was just going through the motions because Jessica had probably sent him. Friday brought a certified letter from a law firm I'd never heard of. Peterson Blake and Associates representing Jessica Walsh Thompson in the matter of financial elder abuse and undue influence. I read it twice before the full audacity sank in. They were claiming that I was financially abusing myself by refusing to give them money, that my lottery win had somehow put me under undue influence to make poor financial decisions. They were demanding I submit to a psychological evaluation to determine my competency. I called Harold immediately. They're claiming what? His voice rose several octaves. Financial elder abuse against myself because I won't pay their debts. Margaret, I've never seen anything quite this creative. They're essentially arguing that keeping your own money constitutes abuse of yourself. Can they do this? Can they force me to have a psychological evaluation? They can try, but any judge worth their robe will laugh this out of court. You've been managing your affairs competently for 67 years. You sought professional financial advice. You're making conservative investment choices. There's no legal basis for this claim, but they can still drag me through court. They can file paperwork. Yes, but Margaret, this actually works in your favor. They've just provided documentary evidence that they're harassing you for money and are willing to make frivolous legal claims when they don't get their way. I made copies of everything and added it to my growing file. Then I did something that felt both terrifying and liberating. I called Peterson, Blake and Associates myself. This is Margaret Thompson. I understand you're representing Jessica Walsh Thompson in some sort of claim against me. Mrs. Thompson, I'd advise you not to speak directly to our office. You should have legal representation. Oh, I will. But first, I want you to know that I've documented everything. The assault in my home, the threatening text messages, the harassment through family members, and now this frivolous lawsuit. When my attorney files a counterclaim for harassment and attempted extortion, I want you to remember this conversation. I hung up before he could respond, then immediately called Caroline. They're suing you for elder abuse of yourself. She was laughing so hard she could barely speak. Margaret, this is the most ridiculous thing I've ever heard. Gets better. They want me declared incompetent because I won't pay their debts. Do you know what this means? They've just handed you everything you need to destroy them completely. No sane judge will side with them. And now you have grounds for harassment charges. Caroline was right. In trying to force me to give them money, they'd given me something much more valuable. Legal ammunition. By Monday I had my own attorney. Sarah Chan specialized in elder law and had dealt with similar cases before. Mrs. Thompson, this is one of the most clear-cut cases of financial harassment I've seen. They're not even trying to hide their motives. What can we do? We file a motion to dismiss their case as frivolous. Then we file our own lawsuit for harassment, assault, and attempted extortion. We have documentation. We have witnesses. And we have their own legal filing that proves they're targeting you specifically because you have money. Will it work? Sarah smiled. Mrs. Thompson, by the time we're done, they'll be paying your legal fees and issuing public apologies. And that's just the beginning. The preliminary hearing was scheduled for Thursday morning. I dressed carefully in my navy suit, the same one I'd worn to parent-teacher conferences for 30 years. Felt like armor. Jessica and Mark sat on the opposite side of the courtroom with their attorney, a nervous-looking man who kept shuffling papers. Jessica was dressed like she was attending a board meeting, all sharp angles and expensive accessories. Mark looked miserable. Judge Patricia Hoffman was in her 60s with silver hair and the no-nonsense demeanor of someone who'd seen every possible human foolishness in her courtroom. Mr. Peterson, she addressed Jessica's lawyer. I've reviewed your filing and I have to say this is one of the most unusual claims I've encountered. You're arguing that Mrs. Thompson is abusing herself financially by refusing to pay your client's debts. Your Honor, Mrs. Thompson has come into significant money and is not thinking clearly about her family obligations. We believe she may be under outside influence to make decisions that harm her family relationships. Outside influence from whom? Possibly her financial advisor or other parties who might benefit from her isolating herself from her family. Judge Hoffman looked over her glasses at the lawyer. Mr. Peterson, are you arguing that seeking professional financial advice constitutes undue influence? We're arguing that Mrs. Thompson's refusal to help her family in their time of need suggests she's not making rational decisions. I see. And what evidence do you have that Mrs. Thompson is mentally incompetent? The lawyer shuffled his papers again. Well, she's elderly, and sudden wealth can be overwhelming. Mr. Peterson, being elderly is not evidence of incompetence. Having money is not evidence of incompetence, and refusing to pay someone else's debts is not evidence of incompetence. Is there any actual evidence that Mrs. Thompson cannot manage her own affairs? The silence stretched uncomfortably. Your Honor, Sarah stood up. We'd like to present evidence of what actually happened here. For the next hour, Sarah methodically laid out the timeline. The dinner party, the demands for money, Jessica's assault, the threatening messages, the wellness check, and finally this frivolous lawsuit. She presented the credit card statement showing Jessica's spending, the documentation of her unemployment, and the evidence that they'd waited until after I won the lottery to ask for help. Your Honor, Sarah concluded, this isn't a case of elder abuse. This is a case of a family attempting to extort money from a lottery winner by filing false legal claims when she refused to pay their debts. Judge Hoffman was quiet for a long moment, studying the papers in front of her. Miss Walsh-Thompson, she addressed Jessica directly. You owe $847,000 in credit card debt. Yes, Your Honor, but I can explain. No need, Mrs. Thompson. Congratulations on your lottery win. How much of your winnings are these people asking you to pay toward this debt? $847,000, Your Honor. Almost 2/3 of what I'll have after taxes. And you refused? Yes, Your Honor. Wise decision. Mr. Peterson, your case is dismissed. Moreover, I'm sanctioning you for filing a frivolous lawsuit. You have 30 days to explain to the State Bar why you thought this was appropriate use of the court system. Jessica's face went white. Mark looked like he might be sick. Furthermore, Judge Hoffman continued, I'm issuing a restraining order. Ms. Walsh-Thompson and Mr. Thompson are prohibited from contacting Mrs. Thompson directly or indirectly for any purpose related to money or financial assistance. Any violation will result in contempt charges. Sarah leaned over and whispered, Now we file our countersuit. 6 weeks later, I was sitting in my garden enjoying the first warm day of spring when Harold called with news that made me laugh out loud. Margaret, you're not going to believe this. Jessica Walsh-Thompson filed for bankruptcy yesterday. Really? How do you know? It's public record. She listed debts of over $900,000. Apparently, the legal fees for their frivolous lawsuit pushed her over the edge. I felt a satisfaction that was probably unworthy of a retired teacher, but I embraced it anyway. What about Mark? Clean. It looks like he kept his finances separate, probably to protect his security clearance. Smart man, though not smart enough to keep his wife's problems from affecting his career. What do you mean? Defense contractors don't like employees whose spouses file for bankruptcy. Creates security risks. Word is he's been transferred to a position that doesn't require clearance. Significant pay cut. I should have felt sorry for him. He was my son after all, but it was hard to work up sympathy for someone who'd watched his wife assault me and then supported her frivolous lawsuit. There's more, Harold continued. Their attorney, Peterson, is facing disciplinary action. Apparently, your case wasn't the first time he's filed questionable lawsuits. The state bar is reviewing his license. 3 days later, Caroline called with the best news yet. Margaret, you have to see this. Check your email. I opened my laptop and found a link to a local news article. Local woman's lottery win leads to legal victory against family extortion attempt. The article detailed the entire case, including Jessica's massive debt, their demands for my money, and the judge's scathing dismissal of their lawsuit. It even mentioned my foundation for financial literacy education. They're famous, Caroline said gluely. Internet famous for trying to steal lottery winnings from a grandmother. My phone rang while I was reading. Unknown number, but I was feeling confident enough to answer. Mrs. Thompson, this is Linda Chun from Channel 7 News. We'd like to interview you about your case. You've become something of a folk hero for people dealing with financial pressure from family members. A folk hero. At 67, I'd become a folk hero for refusing to fund someone else's shopping addiction. I think I'd like that, I said. The interview aired the following Tuesday. Kept it simple. Family should love you for who you are, not what you can give them. Money doesn't create obligations, but respect should be mutual. And sometimes the kindest thing you can do for someone is let them face the consequences of their choices. The response was overwhelming. Letters, emails, calls from other lottery winners who'd faced similar pressure. Stories from elderly people whose families saw them as ATMs. Support from financial advisors who dealt with this kind of manipulation regularly. But the most surprising response came Thursday evening when my doorbell rang and I found Mark standing on my porch alone. Hi, Mom. I know I'm not supposed to contact you, but I needed to say something. He looked terrible. Thin, exhausted, older than his 42 years. Are you here to ask for money, Mark? Because the restraining order. No. I'm here to apologize and to tell you that I filed for divorce yesterday. I invited him in, though every instinct told me to be cautious. Mark sat in the same chair he'd occupied the night this all started. But he was a different person now, humbled, maybe even broken. I should have protected you, he said without preamble. That night, when Jessica threw her drink at you, I should have stopped her. I should have apologized immediately. Instead, I let her convince me that you were being unreasonable. Why didn't you? Because it was easier to believe you were wrong than to admit I'd married someone who would assault my mother for money. He rubbed his face with both hands. Do you know what finally opened my eyes? I waited. When the bankruptcy lawyer asked Jessica to list all her debts, she had another $200,000. I didn't know about shopping sprees, spa treatments, a loan against her car. She'd been hiding debt from me for years. And when I confronted her about it, she said I was being controlling. I'm sorry, Mark. Are you? Because I wouldn't blame you if you weren't. I chose her over you repeatedly. I let her poison my thinking about our relationship. I stood by while she tried to steal your lottery money, and then supported her when she sued you. He was right. I should be angry, should be demanding accountability, should be protecting myself from further manipulation. But looking at my son, genuinely broken and finally taking responsibility, I felt something I hadn't expected. Hope. What changed your mind? The interview you did, watching you on television, talking about respect and consequences. I realized I hadn't respected you in years. I'd been treating you like an obligation instead of like my mother. Jessica made it worse, but she didn't create the problem. I did. I poured us both coffee, noting how his hands shook slightly when he lifted the cup. Stress probably, or guilt. The divorce will be messy, he continued. She's claiming I'm abandoning her in her time of need. She wants alimony, half the house, everything she can get. My lawyer says it could take years. What will you do? Fight it. Document everything. Hope the judge sees through her manipulation the way Judge Hoffman did. He looked up at me with eyes that reminded me of the little boy he'd been. Mom, I know I don't deserve it, but I want to try to rebuild our relationship. Not because I need anything from you, but because I miss you. I miss having a mother who loved me. I never stopped loving you, Mark. But you stopped trusting me. And you were right to. We sat in silence for a while, both of us processing the wreckage of the last few months. There's something else, Mark said finally. Something I found when I was going through Jessica's papers for the divorce. He pulled out a folder and slid it across the table. She'd been researching you for months before you won the lottery. Your financial records, your health insurance, your life insurance policies. She was planning something. I opened the folder and felt my blood turn cold. Credit reports, bank statements, even medical records. How had she gotten access to all this? She works in hospitality, Mark explained. She knows people in records departments, has contacts who can access databases. She was building a file on you. Planning what exactly? I'm not sure, but there are notes about guardianship procedures, about having elderly people declared incompetent. She was researching how to take control of someone else's finances. The implications hit me like a physical blow. If I hadn't won the lottery, if I'd become ill or incapacitated, Jessica had been preparing to take control of my life. She was going to steal everything from me eventually. Think so? Yes. The lottery just moved up her timeline. I stared at the papers, seeing my entire life reduced to data points and potential assets. This woman had been studying me like a predator studies prey, waiting for the right moment to strike. I've given copies to your lawyer, Mark continued. This should help with the harassment case, but Mom, you need to know that she's not done. The bankruptcy will be discharged in a few months, and she'll probably try again. Let her try. I'm protected now, and I'm not the same person she tried to manipulate. Mark smiled for the first time since he'd arrived. No, you're not. You're stronger, smarter, more dangerous than she ever expected. Dangerous is an interesting word choice. You destroyed her mom legally, financially, publicly. She went from thinking she had access to $2 million to losing everything, including her marriage. You didn't just say no to her demands. You made her face consequences for every bad choice she'd made. It was brilliant. Was it brilliant? Or was it just survival? I'd protected myself and my future. But I'd also demonstrated that this allegedly harmless elderly woman could fight back when cornered. What happens now? I asked. Now we both start over. You with your lottery money and your new life. Me with whatever's left after the divorce and the knowledge that I almost lost the most important person in my life. And Jessica, Mark's expression hardened. Jessica learns that actions have consequences. Something she should have figured out long before accumulating $1 million in debt. As Mark prepared to leave, he paused at the door. Mom, the foundation you started, the financial literacy education, I think it's going to help a lot of people avoid the mistakes Jessica made. That's the idea and the name, the Responsible Financial Choices Foundation. That was your way of having the last word, wasn't it? I smiled. I am 67 years old, Mark. I've earned the right to have the last word. After he left, I sat in my garden as the sun set, thinking about second chances and the price of wisdom. My lottery ticket had bought me more than money. It had bought me freedom from people who saw me as a resource rather than a person. It had taught me the difference between love and manipulation. And it had shown me that even at 67, I was still capable of surprises. My phone buzzed with a text from Harold. Foundation received its first donation today. $50,000 from an anonymous donor, who said your story inspired them to help others avoid financial manipulation. I looked around my peaceful garden at the house I no longer had to worry about affording. At the future that was finally truly mine. Sometimes the best revenge is living well. But sometimes the best revenge is making sure everyone learns from your story. I started planning my trip to Ireland. After all, I had the rest of my life to live and I intended to live it on my own terms. Thanks for listening. Don't forget to subscribe and feel free to share your story in the comments. Your voice matters.